Great. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody, depending on where you're coming from. Um, I know we have a few other people coming in from the waiting room right now, but we'll just get started. I know your time is valuable today, so thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day to be here. I also want to thank Wayne and ChildFriendly for their partnership and their support to make these lunch and learns possible. It's great to have organizations that are willing to invest in professional learning and connection and supporting operators across our sector. Today's topic is all about communication. As childcare leaders, we've all had moments where we've thought, I know I communicated that. Then 10 minutes later, someone asks you a question, something gets missed, or a misunderstanding happens, and we realize maybe the message wasn't as clear as we thought it was. Communication is, I think, one of the most important parts of our job, yet it's something many of us have very little, if any, formal training in. We're communicating all day with educators, families, licensing, community partners, parents, and those relationships are built or broken through your communication. Today, we're going to talk about how clear, consistent, and confident communication helps us build trust, helps us strengthen relationships, and create stronger teams. This isn't at all about becoming a perfect communicator. It's about becoming more intentional in your communication. And hopefully, you'll leave here today with a few practical ideas that you can start sharing right away or start using right away in your centers. Today's session is intended, like all of our lunch and learns, as an operator to operator conversation. We're here to share our experiences, observations, practical strategies that have helped you navigate communication challenges and things that pop up in your centers every day. Please feel free to use the chat today to ask us questions, to put your hand up and jump in if there's something you want to share. You guys are experts in this field too, so value your input as we go along. Again, we're not here to represent licensing or anything along those lines, just here to support you and have an open conversation about some of the things we face every day in our childcare system. And I really hope today that we can leave you with at least one idea that you use to make your job a little bit easier and help strengthen communication within your center. Over the next probably 45 minutes or so, we're going to look at why communication matters so much in childcare leadership. And leadership anywhere, I think. We'll explore what I call 3 pillars of trust building communication: clear, consistent, and confident communication. And we'll look at some common communication traps that many of us fall into without even realizing it. We'll talk about practical strategies you can use immediately, and we'll look at how systems and tools can support stronger communication within your programs. Um, because I think that, we want to provide you with as many practical strategies, real life tips and things you can implement right away to make your job easier. Because, I mean, let's face it, childcare is challenging enough already. We don't want to add to your workload. So we'll get right going. When we think about communication, it's easy to think about it as one skill among many skills. But communication really actually touches on almost everything that we do. It affects staff retention, it affects team culture, it affects family trust, accountability, compliance. It is absolutely impacting your reputation as a program. And when communication is strong, expectations become clearer, programs get addressed or problems get addressed earlier, people feel more supported, families feel informed, trust grows. When communication is weak, the opposite happens. Small misunderstandings become larger issues. People make assumptions, really trying to fill that communication gap. Frustration builds and trust starts to erode. What's interesting is that most communication challenges aren't caused by bad intentions. Most people genuinely want to do a good job. Most educators want to succeed. Most families want a positive relationship. Most leaders want to support your teams. The challenge is that good intentions don't automatically create good communication. I think that is the theme for today. Is how do we create good intention or take our good intentions and create good communication that transfers across all parts of your leadership as childcare operators. I want to ask you to think about your last communication challenge that you dealt with. Maybe it was something with a parent, a concern that popped up. Maybe it was a misunderstanding between staff. Maybe it was an expectation that wasn't being followed in your program. Maybe it was a difficult conversation that you knew you needed to have, but you kept putting it off. Whatever comes to mind, just think about how it started. Most communication issues don't begin as major problems. They usually begin in really small moments. Maybe a missed message, an assumption, conversation that didn't happen, a concern that wasn't addressed early, a misunderstanding that slowly grew over time. And that's why communication really matters so much, because communication challenges really rarely start small when they're ignored. They'll build and build. I wanted to put this in for today because there is really a real cost to poor communication or when communication breaks down. So I wanted to kind of show what that real cost is. When communication breaks down, we often see more conflict, lower engagement, reduced trust, more mistakes, higher turnover, and then turnover, I really think it is something all of us can understand. And while there are many reasons that people leave, communication often plays a bigger role than we realize. People don't always leave because of one major event. Sometimes they leave because they feel unsupported or unheard or confused about expectations or disconnected from the leadership, really unsupported in their role. And every time we lose an educator, there's a ripple effect through our program. Children lose relationships, teams lose stability, leaders spend more time recruiting and onboarding, and everybody feels the impact. This is a slide that we used in one of our previous Lunch and Learns, and I thought it really was something I wanted to hit on again today, because there's a hidden cost to having a high turnover in your center. And one of the challenges with staff instability is that it creates a cycle. Experienced staff leave, new staff require support, leaders spend more time training, which is more investment for you as an operator, more time solving problems, more time filling gaps, less time developing your team, less time focusing on growth of the program, less time working proactively, and often communication sits right in the middle of that cycle because people are more likely to stay where expectations are clear, where the relationships are strong, where they feel informed, and where they feel supported. And communication won't solve every staffing challenge, but strong communication certainly helps create the kind of environment where people will want to stay. This brings us to one of the most important ideas I think that we're going to talk about today. Trust isn't built in big moments. And I say this a lot in some of the workshops that we host. Trust is built in small moments, repeated consistently. It's built through follow-up, through reliability, through clear expectations. It's built through honesty. It's built through doing what we say we're going to do. Sometimes leaders, we think trust comes from making one big decision or delivering one great speech or one great kind of professional development day or lunch or something for your staff. But in reality, trust is usually built through hundreds of small interactions that you may not even be aware of. So things like a quick check-in, a follow-up conversation, a clear explanation, a commitment that gets honored, a difficult conversation that you handle respectfully. Those moments may seem small, but over time, those moments are going to become the culture of your program, and that culture will become the trust. When I look back on some of the leaders that I've worked with over the past few years, whether they were operators or directors, supervisors or educators, they all had very different personalities. Some were outgoing, some were quiet, some were highly organized, and some were really, relationship focused. But I think they all had three things in common. Their communication was clear, their communication was consistent, and their communication was confident. And those are the three pillars that we're going to focus on for the next portion of the Lunch and Learn. So what exactly do people need from leadership? When we talk with educators and directors and operators or families, we hear different concerns, but underneath all of the concerns, there's usually three common needs. People want clarity, they want consistency, they want confidence, And we can kind of break down what those actually mean. Clarity, really understanding what's expected. They know what's expected. Consistency, they know what to expect, what's coming, what is going to be kind of the process and the next steps for things. And confidence. They trust what you're telling them. And that comes with time and again with consistency. It all kind of builds together. And it's really interesting is that, one of the things, when one of those things is missing, then your trust starts to weaken, which we talked about in the previous slide. And, I think it's really important to maybe reflect a little bit on a time when expectations weren't clear. People feel uncertain. If you don't know what you're supposed to do or what the process is going to be or the next steps, it really makes you feel like you're not competent in what you're doing, uncertain, maybe not confident in what you're supposed to be kind of doing for the process. If you think about a time when someone was inconsistent, you probably felt frustrated. Think about a time when someone avoided addressing an issue. You probably questioned their leadership, maybe lost some respect for how they dealt with that situation. Trust is built when all of those three things work together. And childcare really gives us an opportunity to practice these every single day. There's an example on the screen where we talk about, clear leadership, explaining exactly what the expectation is around a new policy for outdoor supervision. A consistent leader would reinforce that expectation over time, and a confident leader would explain why the change matters and answer questions directly. When those three things can happen together, people are far more likely to understand, accept, and follow the expectation. So we're going to jump right into the three pillars. We'll start with the first pillar. This is probably the most important one. The first pillar is clarity. Clear, we call it pillar number one is clear. People cannot meet expectations they don't understand. And I want to say that again because it's really one of the most important leadership lessons I've learned. People cannot meet expectations that they don't understand. As leaders, we often believe we've communicated because we said something. But saying something and being understood are not the same thing. There's a quote on the slide that says, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it takes place." And I think that's incredibly true. We've all had moments where we thought, I communicated that, only to discover that maybe your message was interpreted differently, or it didn't land, they didn't understand. And that's why I wanted to put something on here that we called the clarity test. Before communicating something important, ask yourself, is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it understood? Because vague expectations create inconsistent results. Clear expectations create consistency. I did put a practical example here for us so that we could kind of make sure we understood what I meant by this. Imagine you're a director and you've noticed concerns with outdoor supervision. You tell the staff, please improve supervision during outdoor play. At first glance, that sounds clear, but if you really think about it from an educator's perspective, maybe from a new educator too, who's just joining the industry, what does improve supervision actually mean? Does it mean that they should stay closer to the children, do more head counts, change where they're standing, watch specific children more closely? Different educators will answer that question differently. Not because they're trying to be difficult, but because the instruction leaves room for interpretation. If we compare it with what we have under the better communication portion of the slide, during outdoor play, position yourself so all areas of the playground remain visible and complete head counts every 15 minutes. There's a huge difference. There's less guesswork, less uncertainty. You have measurable things that are in that instruction, like a time and exactly what the process is. You're setting your educators up to know exactly what success looks like. And one of my favorite leadership quotes I put in the top right, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. Because when we're unclear, people often end up feeling frustrated. They want to succeed, they want to do a good job, but they don't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing or what success really looks like. The clearer we are, the more successful our teams will become. And once people understand those expectations, the next challenge really becomes something different. It's helping them know what to expect from us. And that's where the second pillar here comes in. Our second pillar is consistency or consistent. Um, and if clarity creates understanding, consistency really creates the trust. People don't need perfect leaders. They need people that are predictable, that think, about them and want to support them and have their back and are consistent. If you ever think about someone or reflect on someone that you've trusted professionally, maybe it was a mentor, former supervisor, colleague, you want to ask yourself what made them trustworthy. It was probably because they were dependable. You could rely on them. You knew what to expect. They showed up for you. They followed through. They did what they said they would do, and they communicated consistently. People can handle uncertainty when it pops up, but what people will struggle with is that unpredictability. When leaders are inconsistent, people start questioning what to expect. Will this concern be addressed? Will I get a response? Will leadership follow through? Consistency answers all of those questions, and consistency is often built in very small ways. Things like returning calls, following up when you say you're going to, keeping commitments, and checking in when you said you would. I did put another example in here too of an actual scenario. We want to imagine an educator approaches approaches a supervisor or leadership and says, "I'm feeling overwhelmed and struggling with behaviors in my room." That conversation took courage. Not everyone feels comfortable coming forward and saying that they need some support in this kind of situation. And finally, deciding to ask for that support likely took a lot of time and preparation and like I said, courage to come forward. Um, in the scenario, leadership responds, "Let's talk about it soon." Now, most leaders genuinely mean what they say in this situation, I think, but the problem is that soon means something different to different people. The day gets busy, staff issues come up, parents need support, an urgent email arrives, licensing comes in. Before you know it, several days have passed. Meanwhile, what the educator is hearing is that their concerns aren't important, that they're on their own, they're not supported, that you're too busy. Um, and really, that leadership's intention was not to have the staff member feel that way. Um, a stronger response really could have, I think, curbed this and set it up for success instead. Instead of using general terms like "we'll talk about this soon," the consistent communication on this slide has it scripted as "thank you for sharing with me. I want to give this the attention it deserves. Can we meet Thursday at 2 o'clock?" Thursday arrives, you make sure that the meeting happens when you said it was going to. That's consistency. Consistency really wasn't about a grand gesture in this situation, but just reliable follow through. And when you're consistent and your follow through is consistent, then the trust grows and your educator will feel supported. We're going to jump to the third pillar, which is confidence. When people hear confidence, they often think about being outgoing, charismatic, being comfortable speaking, but that's not really the kind of confidence that we're talking about today. Leadership confidence is really something much simpler. It's about being honest, direct, being willing to have those difficult conversations and not avoid them. People don't expect you to be perfect, but they do expect you as a leader to be honest. And one of the biggest communication challenges in childcare, I think, is that many leaders care deeply about their staff, but because they care deeply about their staff, they avoid conversations. They don't want to hurt people's feelings. They don't want to upset someone. They don't want conflict. They don't want someone to feel criticized. But unfortunately, delaying those difficult conversations often makes them harder, not easier. We have an example here too. Imagine as a supervisor, you notice an educator is repeatedly arriving late. I think you can use a lot of different scenarios here too, with the same outcomes, but the first time you let it go, the second time you let it go, the third time you might become frustrated, the fourth time you might become resentful. But really, at this point, the educator has no idea that there's a concern. And eventually the conversation happens. The educator might feel blindsided. They're thinking, why didn't someone tell me this sooner? And maybe it's not being late, maybe it's how they're doing, the wrap up at the end of the day, or some of the other processes that you expect from them during the day. And you're thinking as a leader, a supervisor, this has been happening for weeks. How do you not know this is a problem? But neither of you are having the same experience. And that's really what happens when you delay the conversation. The confident response would have sounded like, I'd like to discuss something I've noticed. Over the past 2 weeks, you've arrived after your scheduled start time several times. I want to check in, understand what's going on, and talk about a plan moving forward. Not delaying it week after week after week, hoping that it's going to get better, that they'll notice that you're feeling upset by it or it's having an impact. Delaying it is disrespectful. Having this conversation allows you to show that you're being honest and supportive. It's not about being harsh. It's about being willing to address those issues while they're still small, and setting yourself up for success as a leader, dealing with those small issues before they become something bigger and turn into a large issue that you have to handle. It's a small kind of communication challenge that usually happens because we fall into habits, small habits, unintentional habits, and habits that slowly chip away at the trust over time, which is what we're going to kind of talk about next. We talked about the 3 pillars, and these will be in a handout package you'll get too if you registered for this program, with some visuals and different things you can use in your program. Clear, consistent, and confident, those were the pillars. And on paper, those I think sound super simple, but you might hear those words and think, absolutely, I agree with that. The challenge really isn't about understanding the pillars. I think this is something we all already know. It's going to be applying them when things get messy or stressful or you're rushed and under pressure. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning planning to communicate poorly. Nobody thinks I'm going to, today I'm going to start off by confusing my staff or frustrating a parent, or creating an unnecessary conflict. Yet those communication problems happen every day. And the real reason behind that is because we fall into patterns, habits, assumptions, blind spots. We often don't even realize what we're doing when it's happening. So today we're going to walk through 5 communication traps that we see repeatedly in childcare programs, I think across a lot of different industries and situations too. As I share these, don't think about your staff. Think about, don't think about a difficult parent, but think about yourself in these situations, because I think every one of us has stepped into one of these traps at some point. So the first one that we have is probably the most common one, I think, in leadership. It usually sounds like, I told them, it was in an email, we discussed it in a staff meeting, it's in the handbook. And to be fair, those things are likely true. You probably did tell them and you did send the email and you have it as a policy. But the real question behind this is, did they understand it? Because communication isn't measured by the way we say, or by what we say, sorry. It's measured by what others understand. And that's a huge difference. I'll give you an example here. So, a director notices that educators are not documenting meaningful observations during the day. Likely something, again, you can kind of transfer this to different scenarios as well. At a staff meeting, you might mention, I'd like everyone to improve the quality of their observations and make them more meaningful. The following month, you review observations and you're frustrated. Some people did it one way. Some people, included more photos, like it says. Everyone kind of did something different. Everyone heard the same message, but they interpreted it differently. So there's a suggestion here on what a better approach could have been. It's very specific. Again, it has like measurable outcomes like we talked about before. By meaningful observations, I mean documenting children's learning, including what they did, what skills they demonstrated, and how educators can extend that learning. Here are 3 examples we're looking for. You're setting them up for success. It's very clear. You're not kind of saying it once and hoping that they're going to interpret it the way that you want. Our second trap for today is waiting too long. So the first trap really was around assuming that people know. The second trap happens when we know something needs to be addressed and we don't address it. Most leadership problems don't start as huge problems. They start small. A concern appears, we notice it, we tell ourselves it's probably fine, we'll see what happens, maybe it'll resolve itself, so we wait. And while we're waiting, something else happens. It grows, your frustration grows, resentment grows, and eventually we find ourselves having a conversation that feels much more difficult than it should have been. Not really because the issue became bigger, but our emotions became bigger. And the longer we wait, the heavier that conversation has become, which brings us to a situation that many of us have likely experienced. We have two educators, nothing dramatic is happening, nobody's yelling, nobody's filing complaints, but something feels off. Their responses are shorter, they avoid each other, there's tension, the rest of the team can feel it, you notice it, and you're thinking, hopefully they figure it out, they're adults, it's probably not a big deal. But after 3 weeks of this, the room feels completely different. Other educators feel uncomfortable, children are picking up on the tension, the atmosphere has changed, and now you have a much bigger issue to solve. The earlier conversation might have sounded like, I've noticed some tension recently and I'd like to talk about it before it becomes something bigger. That's leadership. Not because it's comfortable, not really because you want to have that conversation, but because it's responsible. And speaking about comfort, there's another trap that I think most of us will fall into at some point. Communication only when there's a problem. So if we think about this for a moment, imagine, every time your phone rang, somebody was upset. Every email had criticism in it. Every conversation focused on a mistake. Eventually, you'd start associating that communication with negativity. And the same thing happens with our team. If we're only communicating when something's wrong or documentation is missing or a parent complained or a policy wasn't followed, your staff begin bracing themselves every time you approach. And that's really not the culture that we want in our program. You want to build trust, and it grows when your communication includes recognition, not just correction. And I think we often talk about this when we're talking about redirecting children. And I think, you can apply this really to any relationship you have at your center, at home, not focusing only on what's broken, but noticing things when they're working and communicating that too. So things like, a simple, thank you, you handled that parent conversation really well. I noticed the teamwork in the room today. Your observations really improved. Those kind of moments really matter more than we realize. And there's another trap, number 4, that kind of sits underneath this one. It's called saying it once. Sometimes when we communicate, we only say it once. And that becomes frustrated when the message doesn't stick or doesn't land. If you've ever heard yourself say, I already told them, it was in an email, we talked about that. Of course, we all have. And you have probably communicated it. But we're busy. And when we communicate something important and we assume that the work is done, but we don't often think about how that's landed or if it's resonated. And that the educators that we're talking about this to in passing maybe, or just throwing it out there, they're also managing children. They're supporting families, they're covering classrooms, responding to behaviors in the middle of a transition, doing 100 things too. And they may miss the information, they may misunderstand the information, or they may forget, and that's totally normal. It's not, communication is not meant to be a one-time event. It's meant to be a process. And if something matters, it definitely deserves repetition. Think about how children learn and how we expect for children to learn and when we communicate with them. We don't teach a skill once and expect them to master it. We model it, we practice it, reinforce it, revisit it. And adults really aren't much different. If something is important, discuss it at a staff meeting, follow up with it in writing, post a visual reminder somewhere where they're going to see it if it's in the classroom, check for understanding, and then come back to it and revisit it again. It's not about repeating yourself because they aren't capable. It's about reinforcing that information because it's important and because people are human and they're busy and they may learn from different forms of communication. So it's not about, checking a box to make sure your information was delivered. It's about making it delivered and resonate with people so that they remember it and they can act on it. And then for the last trap, which, I think makes most of us uncomfortable, and most of us have had to kind of deal with one of these kind of difficult conversations that we were really hoping to avoid. Um, and I think, if we're honest, this is probably one of the ones we struggle with the most. And we might avoid difficult conversations for good reasons. You care, you don't want the conflict, you don't want someone to feel bad or attacked. You don't want to hurt that relationship. And so you wait. And when you're waiting, you're likely telling yourself, they're having a hard time. I don't want to upset them. Maybe it'll improve. I just need to get the right time. This isn't going to work right now. But what experience here teaches us is that the right time rarely ever comes. And if we're waiting, the issue is usually growing, not because anyone's trying to make it a bigger problem or create more problems, but because unaddressed concerns tend to expand. And really, that's what's going to tie us into our final childcare example. Imagine you have an educator who's wonderful with children. Families love them, they're talented, they're experienced, but increasingly they're creating tension with others, with coworkers. Your other staff are frustrated, the morale is dropping, the team is talking about it, maybe there's some gossip. You notice as a leader, but you don't do anything. You delay that conversation because it's uncomfortable. Weeks pass, the issue spreads, more people are affected, the gossip is getting louder, the trust is declining, and the conversation has now become harder. Definitely not easier. A confident leader doesn't wait for that perfect moment or for the problem to just go away. The better approach here would be to say something like, I'd like to talk about some concerns I've noticed regarding team interactions and really understand your perspective. It's simple, it's respectful, it's direct. And I think that this is, a trap that we can absolutely avoid. So we'll shift kind of from this problem and all the traps and kind of the difficulties that we face into some of the practical strategies that we can leave you with. Hopefully something you can take back and use right away. I think, the good news is that every communication trap we've discussed today is completely fixable. None of them require a bigger budget or for you to hire more staff. They don't require, you to revise your whole policy manual. What they do is require a little more intentionality and often just a few simple systems. One thing I've learned over the past few years is that many interruptions that we deal with every day are actual system problems, not people problems. If you think about questions that you answer repeatedly, questions like, what do I do if a child is having a difficult time at transition? Can I move children between rooms? Where do I find that form? What should we do in this situation? When those same questions keep appearing over and over again, it's worth asking, do we have a communication problem or do we have a system problem? Because every time we answer the same question repeatedly, we're spending time solving the same issue over and over again. Strong leaders look for ways to turn repeated questions into repeatable systems. Just as an example, if you have a standard response that you can create for common situations, develop maybe a quick reference guide for certain things in your program, create visuals visual reminders for your classrooms. Those kind of things will help you to kind of get out of this repetition and having to continue to have the same question asked to you over and over again. So it's really, the goal isn't to answer the same question better, but to reduce the need to have that question altogether, giving people the resources and information that they have, that they need to kind of answer it themselves. And again, this will be followed up with some great resources for you after this too. But the trust communication check. So before sending an email, before having that difficult conversation or introducing a change, or leading a staff meeting, I encourage you to run through your communication through what we call the trust check. So T, is it timely? Is it repeated? Is it understood? Is it supported? Is it trust building? This will really help, I think, to strengthen your relationships, to strengthen the confidence, help people feel more informed and supported. It's a simple framework, but it works. And it forces us to slow down and really think before we communicate. And often those extra moments of thought really can prevent much bigger problems later on. The last communication tool we have is 3 questions to ask before every conversation. Really, before any important conversation, ask yourself question number 1, what do I want people to know? What information am I trying to communicate? What's the message? What's the expectation? What's the key takeaway from this? Question 2, what do I want people to do? So what action are you attaching to this? What behavior are you hoping to come from this? And what really happens next? And your third question, how do I want people to feel? And I think this is one that we often forget because communication isn't only about information, it's about the experience. Do you want people to feel informed, supported, valued, accountable, reassured? When we think about all 3 questions together, communication really becomes much more effective. You're not just there to deliver the information. What you're doing is creating understanding, creating action, and you're building that trust. And ultimately, that's what leadership communication is all about. So that felt like a lot to cover. I hope I wasn't talking too fast. Before we wrap up, I think one thing I've learned is that strong communication is really supported by strong systems. And when information is easy to access, easy to share, communication becomes more consistent for your educators, your families, for yourself. And that's where I can hand this over to Wayne. Most of you have met Wayne. And Wayne will talk about how child-friendly and how his team can support you in hopefully implementing some different communication tools to support you and make your job a little bit easier every day. So I'll pass it over to you, Wayne.
Thanks, Crystal. Yeah, I'll just quickly go over some of our child-friendly communication features. One thing we do really well is digitized communication. We digitize all documentation, and we also make it easy to print out as well. We have learning progress reports with customizable curriculum, daily journals with built-in templates, dashboards, and reports to view or edit attendance records. We digitize the instant reporting process with digital signatures. We also make it easy for you to access family profiles anytime you're on our platform. And then just quickly as well, we also make it easy to engage with families. There's instant messaging that we have for announcements, messages from either the room or admin staff. The learning module is also another way where you can share updates on activities planned for the day. We also have a shareable calendar. All of these communication tools can be targeted to specific groups or individuals. So we do try to be flexible with how updates can be communicated as well. It's pretty quick summary. Thanks so much, Crystal.
You're welcome. So that's it, Wayne, right? I didn't miss anything. Okay. So yeah, that's it for today for our communication lunch and learn. I hope you heard something that maybe gave you, that permission to go have that difficult conversation that you were kind of just hoping would disappear, or gave you some tools and ability to navigate something that's maybe been challenging for you as an operator. Again, if you registered, you're going to get some amazing resources and visuals that you can use to help you in your center. Our next Lunch and Learn will be in July, the beginning of July, but we do have our next Learning Lab for any of you who are registered for that coming next week on June 11th. So that'll go out. Again, if you haven't reached out to Wayne and the team for a demo to see how child-friendly has changed over the last year, they've made some amazing progress for how they can really support you guys as operators, really around that parent communication too, and all the different things you can do with it. Reach out to Wayne and get a demo set and see how it can support your team. And other than that, we'll see you guys, I guess, next week for the Learning Lab and in July for the next Lunch and Learn. I hope you have a great week. We'll see you on the 11th. Have a great day, you guys.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. Bye,
Thanks,
guys.
Wayne. Bye.